Is it just me? Or is Haas really starting to hammer it home about all this? You know, the systematic defamation of one Gunther Steiner. I mean, the court cases were one thing, but now Haas is basically blaming their woes all on Gunther. Wow. The last few days have seriously ratcheted up the shedding of the team's former persona in a way that I was not expecting. In just 6 months, the team has turned a complete 180. Even when I last made a video on the matter, things have changed for the positive. More information has come out from Haas, Ayao Komatsu, the new team principal, Gene Haas in actually spending money on the team, basically going, hey, we were all subjected to the cult of personality that is Gunther Steiner and the legacy that came from Drive to Survive. A lot of the things we can easily blame on that guy. And now that he is gone, the new team principal is free to air all of the dirty laundry that has come from it and explained a lot of the things that we basically just blamed Haas for. That's just what Haas was because of Gene not opening up his wallet. But now we've realised why he hasn't opened his wallet. Because as far as I can tell, the entire team has shaken off the litigation squabbles regarding who can use what in terms of their branding, as well as other things, and I find the entire situation incredibly intriguing, especially the quick turnaround. Now, granted, the fall of Gunther Steiner in a way is not going to be your standard falling of a particular personality. I mean, how can it be? It's Gunther Steiner. Even if he's not working as an F1 team principal anymore, he is going to be knocking around the realms and halls of Formula 1 for a few more years to come. I mean, we've already seen him, as I predicted, become a TV pundit. You even see F1 TV using him for the post-race interviews. Clearly, at this time, Steiner is a media personality, and you definitely want to make the most of it. But how long will that last? Sure, it's looking alright for him at the moment while the aftermath of his removal is still fresh in people's minds, as well as the quips and basic personality, but it will fade into the background over time, and there's a real chance that pretty soon he will be one of those pundits that occasionally says something which causes a flicker of heat online for about a day, and some might just go, yeah, sure thing, Gunther, okay. Now, I'm not saying that's guaranteed to happen. He might have a long, prosperous career in TV ahead of him, I don't know. But we might end up also with a Jacques Villeneuve, and oh, by the way, he's back in the headlines, and guess why? You see, it's very important these days how and why you choose to remain relevant, and with Gunther Steiner, he has many options, and I bet you that come the next season of Drive to Survive, you're going to see Gunther Steiner walk in, sit down as an independent pundit, and he says, great, now I can be honest with all you bankers. Oh, and the producers, how they will laugh as they Now that's all very well and good, and Gunther can do all the tours and publish all the books that he wants, which by the way is something he is planning on doing, intending to have a tell-all story about his exit and the subsequent lawsuits, but the core of this video comes from the hard fact that the team isn't embarrassing anymore, nor is it riding the waves of memery and jokes solely. I think you can probably tell that at this point, even if Drive to Survive is still a thing these days, the memery and japes and sensibilities that we had back in 2018 when Gunther Steiner and Haas rose to prominence in this way has considerably changed. Last year reached a point where I could easily and confidently say that, hey, the Gunther Haas stuff is just not funny anymore, it's not landing. I barely saw anything in that season that the producers could really cling to, save from a couple of moments that were just going back to what was already established, and for the most part, Haas just looked blameless, sad, their stuff not working, Gunther just looking frustrated and just completely helpless. It wasn't really funny. I think that's what producers were trying to do, but it just wasn't. They will have their place in the history of F1's rise to cultural prominence, sure, but it's just that. History. And now, the new team principal is keen to make Haas story himself. You see what I did there? Ayao Komatsu has done the impossible, seemingly, managing to get Gene, famously known for being a skinflint, to actually spend a little moolah. Maybe because we now realise that maybe Gene was waiting for the right reasons for said investment. Now, granted, the settling up of his Haas operations, meaning that it is either been finished completely or has been vastly scaled back, means that a few squillions and squillions of dollars have been opened up to him so he can now splash the cash, but it still remains the fact that for the longest time, Gene was unwilling to spend on the Haas operation more than he would have liked to. In fact, in one of the statements regarding Gunther's exit, it was down to the fact that he wanted more money to invest in the team, and then Gene said no. Now with what Komatsu has said, we've now realised that, oh okay, maybe Gene was right, just get more out of what you already have, and then maybe he will consider more investment. But there's also a different energy within the team, which is for the better. And the boss of the team itself is the direct cause of it too. And the main strategy, I reckon, is to tear down all the stuff that Steiner was supposedly responsible for, instilling in the fandom's attitude of what Haas was. Basically going, hey, you remember how Gunther did all of that? Yeah, we're not doing that anymore. And one particular answer from Ayao Komatsu really hammers home how bad it got under Gunther and how desperate they were to find a new leader. And he said it thusly. Working as a team. And that's it. Oh, sick burn. Now, even though you may not be familiar with Komatsu, he has been around F1 for a long time. And we have to also remember that the team principal is an engineer first and foremost. And we also have to remember, Komatsu was well respected in a way because he got a seat in the infamously small Haas pit wall. That was cut down to save $250,000 a year, you know, because, you know, it had 3 people instead of 6. We need to remember that 2023 was a pretty dire year, and not only did it prove to be a rather boring year for the team, since they didn't have any major sponsor-related shenanigans or maladies come their way, but the tyre shredding trait that had been around since 2019 when the regulations were tweaked regarding the front of the car, and the wing especially, was just not being fixed. The people at Haas who worked with Dallara couldn't figure it out. It was just something that came about with the brand new front wing, and it would change everything going behind it, and Gunther and his team just simply had no answer for it, or they couldn't actually come up with a plan in which to deal with it. It might have instilled in Steiner the idea of, oh, what's the point in spending money in these upgrades? They're not going to work. We may as well just work on next year's car then. And then just repeat. And okay, they got to a point where it was pretty good in qualifying. We saw last year all the time, Nico Hülkenberg bringing that car into Q3. But then they get to that point where, just like Sauber this year with their pit stops, but by the time they get to about maybe the time of the first pit stop, the Haas completely falls, and then they're 15th or 16th or something like that. It's just, what's the point of even going if you can't really show any points for it? In my mind, Komatsu was actually really effective from the very first big decision that he actually chose to make, and that came in pre-season testing. Everyone else was trying to get ahead in terms of 2024, try and get some pace, work on their short runs, a little bit more time before the Bahrain Grand Prix, but what does Ayao go and do? He decides to just throw all of that in the bin, accept that they're going to be the slowest car for a while, and then focus on the problem that they've been having for the last 5 years. Wow, that was actually a plan, instead of just hoping that upgrades would do the best, and then they don't, and then you have to think of something all over again. So already, that was a really impressive thing. So the moment Komatsu said that, I was like, okay, all right, that's a good plan. And you know what? I think it's worked. The Haas car is a lot more forgiving on its tyres. Sure, it's not exactly giving them soft kisses and cuddles or anything like that, because you don't want to go too far, because otherwise you end up with a car that simply can't turn the rubber on. I mean, maybe you could try buying them dinner first, that might help. In all seriousness though, this was a drastic move that paid off, and the clarity of Komatsu has been quite refreshing to witness for all concerned. It was just getting boring seeing Haas as a joke, but seeing them as a competent team, that's actually more interesting. Now, I will admit that back when the news broke, we were all lamenting the loss of Gunther Steiner, and we were all thinking that, oh great, now Haas has got no direction at all. Haas is probably going to sell up his own team or something like that, and hiring Komatsu, he's an engineer. He might just be a yes man like Mike Crack or something like that, or be completely anonymous. Oh no, oh whoa, and then we got Andretti, that's an American team, and Haas is not an American team, no! But you see, all of this came about from the fact that Haas was dripping with the star-studded spectacle of the Steiner effect. We all were. We were all bamboozled by it. But to be fair to Gunther, the first 2 seasons of Haas's existence were incredibly competent and laudable. Those first 2 years before Drive to Survive became a thing, Gunther was doing enough, and there weren't that many expectations regarding Haas. The fact they even got on the grid and was scoring points fairly often was a triumph. We've got to give Gunther credit where it's due. Getting a team from concept to reality in 18 months and them scoring points and looking fairly competent quite a lot of the time, that is something that not many team principals can actually claim, and this was his baby, this was his idea, and he got it to work at a time in around 2016-2017, it worked like a charm, and therefore he was actually playing to his strengths. He found efficiencies and the like to get a team off the ground and keep it going, especially during the peak of the limitless spend era of F1, where the top teams could spend whatever they wanted effectively, and the smaller teams had to either find sponsors or cut costs just to survive. And come 2018, the team had its best year ever, so it proved that whatever he was doing at the time was working well. Whatever I say in this video, I cannot take away what they were able to do that year. Getting 5th place in the Constructors for Haas in their 3rd year, that was fantastic. Just props to them, seriously. Gene and Gunther at the time, they came up with a really, really good operation. But the biggest problem that I've seen with Gunther is that he cannot and will not adapt. Well, I mean, dealing with dodgy sponsors, that's another bad thing, but I was mainly talking about the car itself. They couldn't adapt for the brand new tweak in 2019, or in 2021, I mean, they didn't even bother that year. And also, there wasn't a need to save as much money. As I've said many times, when the cost cap era arrived, the top teams were limited in what they could spend, but it made the lives of the smaller teams that little bit easier. They could catch up. The hunt for efficiencies to cut costs like they were back in the 2010s wasn't as dire anymore. And if you could find the sponsors or the right investment from outside, you could really start to make some ground on the front of the pack. I think the cost cap is now proving that ultimately it's been a good thing. It's starting to show its teeth, because right now, Red Bull is desperately trying to find just these tiny little gains, whereas all the other teams have now figured out what they need to do with this new era of not spending as much money, and they're now beginning to take big chunks out of Red Bull's advantage. And with Mercedes, they've now actually figured out, mostly Toto's been able to figure out, how to get the upgrades on the car, get them to work, without spending nearly $400 million to do it. And the best thing about all of this is that none of the teams are financially precarious anymore. They're not in any risk of going bankrupt. And maybe the new cost cap limit of $220 million supposedly for 2026 might roll that back a little bit, but hey, it might allow Red Bull to be able to find some ways of restructuring, because if you think about it, they've actually not changed how they've done things for a good long time. So maybe they might be able to make the most of this new opportunity with a brand new wind tunnel to boot. All this meant that after 2021, the rampant spending spree saga of F1 was well and truly over, and Haas had been able to come out the other side of it, as well as 2020, when some of the teams genuinely looked like they were going to go broke because, you know, there was no Formula 1. But the thing about this is, though, is that Gunther didn't really come up with a plan or make the most of the fact that, hey, we don't need to spend so much anymore. We can now breathe a little easier. So all they thought was, oh, let's forget about 2021, think about 2022, which in isolation is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, considering that we're about to head to a new regulation cycle. I mean, Ross Brawn managed to make that work twice. But the big thing that I think Gunther forgot is that you still also have to spend money to do well in that following season. I mean, with Brawn, there wasn't really much they could do. They literally did not have any money to develop upgrades. I mean, I think they did one in-season upgrade and that was it, but you could forgive them. They did really well considering what little they had. The words of Komatsu have thrown a white-hot light at the situation, and it's become clear that the team were left without a clear direction or a brave new plan for a brand new F1 come 2022. Because according to Steiner, upgrades were a waste of money. And that way of thinking permeated throughout the entire organisation for years. That led to a self-fulfilling prophecy of simply not thinking about upgrading the car, like all the other teams did. Komatsu has also expressed that he was frustrated that they just could not do what typical F1 teams did, and that was, over the season, you add upgrades, either as fairly sized packages or just bit by bit. But Steiner's philosophy was not to just make an upgrade ready for, say, round 4 or 5, but it was to fully understand the car inside and out, see how it makes it tick, optimize it, and then maybe sometime in the middle of the season do another upgrade package and then repeat the process. Now, in theory, again, that's okay. That is good in terms of optimization, but you still need to understand and develop the car as well, so you sort of need to have a good hand-in-hand dynamic of what works for both camps. But no, it was min-maxing almost. I do understand that he wanted to fully understand a car before changing it and then finding new problems. I mean, Ferrari's shown that as clear as day this year. But that idea kind of needs a fast baseline, which might not need constant upgrades, which McLaren had shown as clear as day themselves this year as well. Sure, the 2022 Haas was good, but all the other teams caught up faster and upgraded bit by bit almost constantly because this was the beginning of a new regulation cycles. The gains came rapidly. And then last year it was the exact same thing, but the difference was is that the big upgrade package didn't come until Austin. And then it didn't work. And then the following race, you had one driver not wanting to use it at all. And that was just a big, utter failure at one of their own home circuits. It was just laughable at this point. But what I'm seeing right now from the team is a complete and utter dismemberment of Gunther Steiner's involvement in the team. They are trying to shed the skin of Steiner and just shed light and manifest understanding as to why the team has been seen as a joke or hopeless for so long. Simply put, they are saying that Gunther had absolutely no clue in how to adapt to the brand new era of Formula One with all of these brand new rule changes, a philosophy of the car which is completely different, and also realizing that you don't necessarily have to scrimp and save all the time. Because right now, F1 is really appealing to the big companies out there. You're getting sponsors coming in, you're getting organizations working with F1 in association for Grand Prix events themselves. There is no lack of involvement with big companies. I mean, yes, the MoneyGram deal was a good one for Haas, and for a typical team, that would be seen as a good move. But for Haas, after years of being associated with madcap or controversial entities, this could be seen as boring and dull. Over the last few years, Haas was known for making weird, brash decisions which made them interesting. The thing that kept people interested in Haas was just not there. Last year just looked really sad. It just was hopeless, aimless, directionless, not inspiring at all. And all amidst the ideas of Andretti coming in to be the American team. And what's the current American team doing? Well, not a whole lot. And don't get me started about that laughably late track limits appeal at Austin that came like months later than necessary, right before the deadline ended. It was just absolutely ridiculous. Because that was the only way that Gunther thought that they could maybe get a few more points and then leapfrog Alfa Romeo by just going to the stewards about it. Really? Granted, I thought Gunther was right at the time that the team did need more money as everyone else was doing it, but now looking back on it, what the team needed was a change of mood, especially since Andretti's been knocking on the door, and Michael Andretti had historically been poking Gene Haas to try and sell up the team to them. And yes, you could quibble as to Haas being the American team, since the majority of their operations are either in Oxfordshire or in Italy, and the only bit of Americanism that they have is based in North Carolina in terms of their admin. But still though, it's what we've got, and they've been really embracing the American identity. And I really think that Liberty Media and Formula One is trying to just get Haas to get a grip and realize that they are the American team, and they really need to start getting their act together. And I think that's exactly what they've been doing. F1 needs them more than ever to swat away the likes of Andretti, because they've now become a problem, especially with the Department of Justice. And I think it's worked, because right now, it looks more legit, Haas. This year has been all about bulldozing the aura surrounding Steiner, and instead erecting a new standard which is now paying off handsomely. And it's now wound up with people wanting Nico to stay at Haas, rather than escape it. Now, who would have thought that a little under a year ago, yeah? Now, you might be on the other side of the fence and thinking, oh, well, this is just amazing. How dignified and elegant of Haas. They are just blaming Gunther for everything. They're making him the scapegoat. And I understand what you're thinking. This is an incredibly vicious and sustained attack of character on one guy. I understand that. And you might be thinking, well, oh, you're just salty about Steiner because he got rid of your boy Mick Schumacher. Well, if you get a situation where Helmut Marko says that what Gunther did was harsh, I think that speaks volumes because of what Dr. Marko is. But just looking past that, there clearly was a lot of bad things going on behind the scenes, and even though Gunther was popular with the grunts, and he didn't have any complaints from them in terms of how he was and how he acted with them, the difference is, though, is that he was the constant. He was there from day one. It was his team from day one. So probably a lot of people who came into Formula One or moved to Haas thinking of something better, they just thought, well, that's just the way Haas did things. That's just the way we rolled. But then Komatsu comes in. Now he has the authority to actually enact on his own opinions and his engineering-based ideas and goals. Now it's all changed. And there's just this motivation, this energy. This is quite clear, and even Gunther has said so himself, that maybe he should have left the team sooner because things were just not working out, and it clearly was not working out for any of them. So now maybe it's just a situation where Haas just needs to evolve, to adapt, to not be a joke team anymore. That time has passed. And I think we can safely say that people now care about Haas and what it could offer for the future. And I think a lot more American fans will come back to Haas, realizing that it's getting better, and it might actually be pretty good. Let me know in the comments if you're from the US and your attitude toward Haas has changed at all. Now, I do feel bad for Gunther, I really do. This was his creation, and he managed to make it a really solid and competent team, which did not go under at all. That is no mean feat. Credit where credit is due there. But in this case, there was just a situation where he was gifted this fandom that he wasn't expecting. It got to his head. He believed that he was Haas. He was the definitive person. And the cult of Gunther Steiner just grew and grew and grew and grew. And everything he did was just the thing that kept Haas relevant. Everything else was just a sideshow. The team was searching for an answer, but they weren't getting it from their team principal. And ultimately in F1, you need to have a team principal who has a clue as to what to do. Last year just realized that, yeah, Gunther had no clue. But then we have to be fair again, that Haas did milk Gunther for all he was worth, and that's why we're in the middle of litigation. Gunther blaming Haas for using his likeness without permission, and vice versa. It's got messy, it ended badly, but at least now Haas has some sense of direction, and we can expect them to do slightly better, or at least act like an F1 team should. And you could also argue if the docuseries never existed, Haas probably wouldn't be around anymore by now, or it might have been bought out by another organisation. Maybe in a way Steiner saved the team in that regard, by being a poster boy. But his word became gospel and the fanbase generated from it would defend him to the ends of the earth because he had the quips, the memes. Now that the team has got shot of him though, the team can now actually reintroduce themselves to the world and say, hey, we're not as bad as you think we are. Allow us to show you how good we can be. And now Komatsu has the freedom to actually shout out to the world, I've got a plan, and it's as hot as my pants! And I look forward to seeing it. The idea, not the pants. But I can also imagine that a lot of you out there are confused as to why the heck he's bringing Esteban Ocon into Haas to partner Oliver Behrman. You would think that the latter is being led to the slaughter or something. I'm not worried about that though. I think it could be a good idea. And you can find out why I think that in this video here that you can go and watch right now. I shall see you there.